So thank you, Shani. I am so excited to share these slides about archival recovery and type and design history as a practice. So to map out, and I would be so excited if the slideshow would work. Yes, okay. So to map out where we're going to be going, I'm going to start with some big questions and some arguments. Then I'm going to move to a specific case study, the Re-Uncovered podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. We will think about archival recovery as circulation, remediation as method, and community as power, and then wrap up thinking about what's next. Overall, archival recovery is my lever, and the podcast is my case study for bigger ideas and questions. So some big questions, because, apparently we either have teeny tiny questions here or we have very large questions. And I'm trying to, split the difference, make some arguments. So things that got me here today. Why do we even talk about type? Isn't it supposed to be invisible? And there are heavy scare quotes about that. And I'm glad that people are laughing because that's supposed to be a type joke. So okay, what happens when mechanically replicated texts shift from pages and screens to other media forms that are multimodal and may not include visuals? For the people in the back, mechanically replicated texts are how I think about and have written about the media continuum from printed pages to screens instead of sharply dividing the analog from the digital. Apparently that was not what, I'm not going to say that on camera. I'm also, and you're like, but there's a third question. There is a third question. What affordances come from the transition into audio forms? Also, what gets lost? We can't just talk about the pros, we have to talk about the cons. And what are some of the challenges in these kinds of shifts? Other questions include, how can we think about design inclusivity without a history that reflects a constellation of the people who did in fact do this work? And here we talked yesterday a lot about the labor behind the scenes, the keynote this morning, the hand that we can see or not see. How do we think about that? When does specificity become a barrier to entry? And how can we make design history more legible to non-experts and experts alike? And I am speaking to you, academic folks, with your gatekeeping words and your long phrases. And lastly, does removing visuals actually make type design easier to see? A paradox that we will be exploring more in the coming moments. My big argument today is that audio-only podcasts can effectively discuss graphic design and typography history without immediate aspects to their visual aspects. In fact, such shifts in form, mode, and audience remain critical for increased accessibility, discoverability, and successfully reaching wider public. So reaching wider publics, usually a good mode. Let's try it out. So to think about these shifts, I will be using the Re-Uncovered podcast, again, available wherever you get your podcasts. I'll do a quick overview of how this project came to be and where we'll get into some more nitty-gritty details connected to circulation, remediation, and community. So the origin story, the lore, if you will. So in 2021, I was a PhD candidate at the University of California, Davis. I'd been volunteering as a cataloger at Letterform Archive in San Francisco, where I lived, and applied for, then received a Mellon Scholars Public Fellowship, where I made the materials for a resource focused on women in the hot metal type era of print. So this is the late 1800s to 1950s or so. And this finding aid or resource, depending on how you want to call it, should be live as part of Letterform's online archive updates coming this fall, so please keep your eyes peeled. After finishing my PhD in September of 2022, I started thinking more seriously about making a podcast of my own. And since I had all this cool material at my disposal, it seemed like a perfect theme for a first season. I figured out the topics for each episode and found guests and an editor because sound is way harder than text editing. I have been a text editor for decades. Sound is harder. We had all the interviews recorded by 2024. Then I moved with under 3 months notice across the ocean to a postdoc in France. That's not a great time to launch a podcast, just pro tip. We fully launched in 2025, and as of today, we have over 900 downloads. No ads, and a new episode just dropped for those of you who have already, wait for it, liked and subscribed. Um, we have an episode about mid-century modernism that just came out earlier this week. I will talk about, again, near the end, the community aspect of this project has been a big draw for making the whole thing happen. I am deeply interested and invested in connecting people and building community throughout conversations and through conversations and with conversations and having conversations. And I also wanted to show off other people's work because it's so cool. So a podcast seemed like the right platform to make those things happen. Currently, we are a scrappy gang with me, Joe, the sound editor, Jenna, the artist who makes episode art for the seasons and the episodes, and then Liz is our social media presence. It's self-funded for now because I don't want to have ads or curtail access. We do have a buy me a coffee if people want to support the show, but it in no way yet covers our actual costs. Here's an overview of the first season. Each episode centers on one or two women type designers and lasts somewhere around 40 minutes. Some are a little less, some are a little more. My editor, Joe, and I talk about at the start of each show what we know about the woman or women of that episode. Sometimes this is sentences. We know they made a thing and they were born and or died. Sometimes that's it. Sometimes it's paragraphs, stories even of information. Sometimes they even wrote things. And that's really great, but rare. When we first try, and then so we do the sort of biographical overview, and then we look at some of their designs together. We first tried just me doing a little intro, but it as a solo performer, but it felt really flat. And I hate to be boring, as I'm sure that you can tell already. And so we played around a bit and eventually landed on this where Joe then becomes a listener proxy and a learner. And so we introduce the guest or guests of the episode, and then my conversation with the guests takes up the bulk of the time. There's an outro at the end, and we're done. It's really been exciting, giving people access to niche archive materials and highlighting awesome work. In particular, Lauren L. DeGain's thesis, A Woman's Type, from 2021, where she goes into these women type designers of the hot metal era. It's available open access online. You can Google her name and A Woman's Type. It shows up first thing. It's beautifully done. She also did letterpress with, it's cool. And then Dan Reynolds and his encyclopedic knowledge of German foundries. And if you know, you know, because Dan knows kind of everything about German type foundries. It's amazing. So the show notes have links to the guests and whatever resources are mentioned. Here's a not so sneak because it's out preview of this modernism episode we just dropped. And there is a hard 4,000 character limit on the description, which has forced me to be terse and often creative with my emoji and use of linked text because that counts as more characters and that makes me angry. So each episode also has a transcript, which I edit to correct the names and any major errors I can. A running joke in the show is that most of this is German. I do not speak German. The automatic transcription has a really fun time when it's like Bauer, and you're like, it looks like Bowser, and it's been a fun time. I'm really so. There have been some challenges in keeping up momentum while moving across the Atlantic, and a few unexpected pivots. But that said, I'm quite pleased with what we've ended up with, even if I have blown my own deadlines more times than I can count. And I'm sure none of you have ever missed a deadline. So just imagine what that feels like, please. So in terms of archival recovery at circulation, we're going to think touching on how this feeds larger design and inclusivity and recognition for what overlooked or invisible elements like type actually do. So archival recovery is like dinosaurs. Pause, sip of water. I came up with this analogy for the podcast, and I really think it helps frame the intersection of archival recovery and history. So dinosaurs existed. We are taking this as a given. And if you don't believe in that, that's cool, but just bear with us for a few more minutes. So the dinosaurs existed, then there was a meteor, or the Earth destroyed, or whatever, and then they stopped. And there are lots of things we still don't know about dinosaurs. And what we do know about dinosaurs has dramatically changed over time. So this picture is of the Crystal Palace dinosaurs, which are still around in London. And they show us the late Victorian era concept of dinosaurs. But if a similar project happened today, there would probably be feathers, and these particular species might not even exist because they figured out that those bones actually go in a different way or were configured a different way. Um, and so, dinosaur technology has changed, is what I'm trying to tell you. When I was a child, we had The Land Before Time, and by the time we got to Jurassic Park, dinosaurs already looked different. And so we will never actually know 100% what dinosaurs looked like, how they lived, what they were. We cannot access that 100%. It is not recoverable. But our understanding of them changes and evolves over time. So what dinosaurs were does not change. It's our perception of them. And you can take this and make this with history, and how we can deal with the uncoverable or the hard to find details there. So circulation and transmission are both vital aspects of archival recovery. Briefly, we need materials for qualitative methods, particularly grounded theory, to work at all. And for these next slides, I have references to who I'm thinking with. And if you want any of the references, please email me. There's info at the end. I'm happy to share stuff. I just wanted to keep the slides clean. Archival recovery is also a form of feminist praxis, such as the effort starting in the 1970s and 80s to recover and reprint works by women writers in from earlier eras. There are more people than I can easily name here thinking about the role of feminism in archival practices from all sorts of perspectives. And if you have a favorite person you like to cite in places like this, please let me know, because I am looking for a clean citation, because that's a lot of people. Not that that's a problem, but it's a lot of people. Knowledge, of course, demands circulation in order to be recognized as knowledge. New technologies make these circulations possible. We can talk about social media's earlier antecedents, if you'd like, in the Q&A. And recovery requires others to know about the new old thing. Podcasting and sound work, a term proposed by Michelle Hilmes, for the sound-based complex of digital media, are inherently hybrid, evolving multimedia forms. As I'll discuss more in a minute, these entangled multi-actor forms help knowledge production and dissemination beyond even intended audiences. Lastly, I also want to acknowledge the serendipity of the archive, particularly when working with a mix of digital and physical materials. Much like how I ended up in this room today, archival serendipity plays out, stumbling across something you didn't expect, but is actually exactly the thing you needed, and it puts it all together. Now we're going to think about remediation as method. Remediation makes us rethink about the materials that are being transmitted or adapted. As a scholar who is trained in 18th century British literature, I draw on ideas of media as work being done by tools, such as proposed by Siskin and Warner, and communication as explained by John Durham Peters. Peters says that our concept of communication today is only possible after mediated communication exploded with the growth of print culture in the 1700s, at least in Anglophone contexts. So we couldn't have the idea of communication without having a mediated communication to push it back against. Remediation happens when communication transfers from one medium to another. Remediation can also remix, assemble, bricolage, reform, and make contents into something new. It relies on circulation to exist. Podcasting already requires remediation to exist, and there's a whole host of smart material out there about how podcasting works with, and yet is also distinct from, radio and other audio. Bonini's conception of podcasting as a hybrid, constantly evolving cultural form, I found a very helpful framework. And it includes all these other older associated media forms that podcasts then incorporate in remix, like radio, screen-based visuals, such as logos or social media accounts, serial print medias like pamphlets and newspapers, narrative journalism, graphic design, and internet participatory cultures. So one way we remediate on the podcast is by having non-design experts explain things. Pause for laughter about the memes. Thank you. Either Joe, my editor, or I act like a proxy for the listener, depending on the conversation. It's a similar method to the naive narrator or the new kid at school who gets everything explained to them so the audience is learning alongside without feeling like they are missing things they should already know about. So here's a short clip from the podcast to illustrate what I mean, subtitled for your convenience. Why is it not playing? I'm not muted. Huh. Well, you're just going to see that we're just.
This is very on the side of an absinthe bottle sort of vibes.
It totally is.
It's gorgeous though.
It is really pretty. And we'll have links in the show notes to.
Okay, so the technology sort of worked. We love that. So this is Belladonna itself, looking very organic and hand lettery. It makes me think of Ruskin stones of Venice and Art Nouveau. This is part of the type specimen, and this is an advertisement showing it in use, because before the internet, you had to print up samples so that people could see how the typeface could be used. Kate Bordeaux has an excellent overview of how transparency and invisibility have been theorized for typography, breaking down why the crystal goblet metaphor doesn't fully work, but also teasing out this visible invisibility. I build on her work about how type's total absence makes it paradoxically easier to see. It's another way of thinking through gaps and lack. So when we talk about type on the podcast to a listener who cannot see it, the type is rendered more visible. For this last section, I'm going to think about overlapping power of the many communities that contribute to this podcast. Guests on the show come from a mix of people I already knew and people that were suggested. I just want to say again how amazing and generous people have been in taking the time to answer my emails, do prep calls, and record with me. The design community has been a welcoming one, and I appreciate it. There's also a strong current of serendipity with who answers their emails and says, oh, talk to so-and-so. That's been a huge lift, as well as people sharing the podcast with their friends, clients, fans, mailing lists, social media channels, and the like. As a teacher, I'm a flipper of classrooms, in part because whoever is talking is usually doing the learning. I've taken this praxis to a podcast format, even though I am the host. Thus, the emphasis on conversations instead of me presenting knowledge from a position of absolute authority. Paulo Freire was right about who the banking system of education profits, and it is not the learner. Besides decentering the center, I'm also driven to create pathways for DIY archival exploration by learners. My hope is that people can listen and have that be enough, but maybe you can listen and go click on some links, or maybe it opens a whole new project you never thought, because who doesn't need a whole new project again? There's a lot of work happening with a similar recovery praxis, including projects like Unseen about early women German designers that I just came across earlier this month. And I would love for you to email me back, please. Email me back. Thank you. See Jenny Davis for ideas about the affordance as a framework for thinking about how objects shape action. Accessibility here means a few things for me. First, the podcast is free to listen to. I want to hold off from having ads so anyone can engage with the work and don't need to be on a specific platform. That's also why I'm paying for the hosting and production expenses myself. Accessibility also motivates the transcripts being posted for every episode, except for one that's missing because of an oversight. It's coming. And this makes the content available for those who are hard of hearing or listeners who might have auditory processing issues. The transcripts make it more discoverable for SEO that runs Google and people who maybe search stuff and find it. For those of you who have seriously considered studied communication systems, you know that redundancies are also a power. We build in redundancies so we can get accurate single transmission. Building in the multiplicity of messages means things will disseminate and make change, from big ideas like canon expansion to smaller but still important correcting of records. The podcast has an Instagram, since that seems to be the social media of choice for many of our target audiences, and it's also been a way to locate others working on cool projects. So as my time draws to an end, a few final thoughts. First, please pay more attention to what is outside the silo so we can have future grains. We are in an agricultural building right now. That is serendipity. And it is important that this silo is here to store the grain. And yes, I do love analogies, so get ready. Legibility and access are so context dependent, particularly when dealing with people inhabiting academic spaces, that sometimes the wider, more open spaces and publics are turned into afterthoughts, not seen as serious, misrepresented, or excluded. Interdisciplinary work also requires an openness to other forms of knowledge production, a tacit acceptance of bidirectionality for ideas and workflow. Let's continue to think about working with, working for, and mutual benefit without exploitation as drivers of lifelong learning. Remember how the joy of discovery never gets old, but also someone or something probably put that thing wherever you, quote unquote, discovered it. What's next for the podcast is we are officially making a second season called Crafting Archival Recovery. We'll showcase folks making cool things using archives broadly construed over the past 50 or so years. You can use this QR code to find the podcast and me via our bio.link or just email reuncoveredpodcast@gmail.com. Pitch us if you or someone you know would be a good fit. I had to have a colophon. You can also, as I said before, contact me for specific references I made in this talk. I'm happy to send them along. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe.